The carriage rattled along the winding road that led through the moors, its wheels sinking slightly into the damp soil of Blackmere Vale. The mist hung low that afternoon, curling around the heather like ghostly fingers. Harriet Lorne pressed her hand to the windowpane, watching as the outline of a great house appeared through the fog. Blackmere Manor. The estate that had once belonged to Lady Agatha Renly, her newest subject, and perhaps her most intriguing one yet. Harriet had written about poets, explorers, and painters before, but none of them had ended their lives as mysteriously as Lady Agatha. The villagers still spoke her name in whispers, and that alone was enough to draw Harriet here. The coachman, a stout man with a Yorkshire accent, cleared his throat as they reached the gate. "You're sure you'll be all right up there alone, miss? Locals say that place isn't fond of strangers." Harriet smiled faintly. "I am not here as a stranger. I am here as a listener." The man gave a nod, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. The iron gates creaked open with a groan that echoed across the valley. Beyond them stood the manor, grand, yet wounded by time. Windows stared blankly out from ivy-covered walls, and the roof sagged slightly under years of weather and silence. Inside, dust cloaked everything. The air was heavy with the scent of forgotten books and damp wood. Yet despite the decay, the place carried a strange grace. Harriet set her typewriter on the wide oak desk near the window, where light seeped through lace curtains. Her first night was eerily quiet. The wind brushed against the old glass panes, and somewhere deep in the house, a clock ticked slowly. She found a faded portrait of Lady Agatha hanging in the drawing room, a tall woman in mourning black, with eyes so sharp they seemed to follow her. Harriet whispered softly, almost amused, "Well, Lady Agatha, I suppose we are housemates now." The silence seemed to listen. Later, as midnight approached, she sat by the window and began to write her opening lines. The typewriter's keys clicked gently in the stillness. Yet just as the clock in the hallway struck 12, a low sound drifted through the air. It was not the wind. It was softer, like a sigh, or the hum of a woman's voice, echoing faintly through the mist outside. Harriet froze, her fingers hovering over the keys. The sound came again, clearer this time, rising from the vale below, like someone calling a name she did not yet know. Her candle flickered. The windowpane trembled slightly. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, came a whisper, one so close it seemed to form behind her ear. "Do not finish the story." Morning came grey and damp, the mist still clinging to the slopes of Blackmere Vale like an old memory refusing to fade. Harriet woke with the taste of dust in her throat and the uneasy thought that she had dreamt of whispers. Yet the typewriter on her desk told a different story. The paper she had left blank now bore 3 new words, typed neatly across the top in faint ink. "She remembers me." Harriet stared at them, her pulse quickening. She was certain she had shut the typewriter lid before going to bed. Perhaps she had written it herself, half asleep. Perhaps her imagination had wandered where it should not. She tore the page free and folded it into her notebook. After breakfast, she ventured into the village to ask about Lady Agatha. Blackmere's main street was a narrow stretch of cobbles lined with crooked houses. The people greeted her politely, but there was hesitation behind every smile. When she mentioned the manor, conversations thinned like smoke. Only one woman, Mrs. Clary from the bakery, dared to speak openly. "They say Lady Agatha still walks the vale on nights of fog," she said quietly while wrapping Harriet's loaf. "They call her the widow, because she mourned a man who never died." Harriet frowned. "Never died?" Mrs. Clary whispered, leaning closer. "They buried her husband empty. The coffin was filled with stones. Some believe she cursed the ground when she found out." That night, back at the manor, the wind returned, dragging the scent of rain through the cracks. Harriet lit the fire, though the logs hissed as if reluctant to burn. The portrait of Lady Agatha seemed darker now, the painted eyes glinting faintly in the flicker of flame. She began to write again, determined to keep her thoughts grounded in facts. Yet halfway through her second page, a faint thud echoed from beneath the floorboards. Another followed, and another, slow, deliberate, like the rhythm of footsteps pacing below. Harriet's breath caught. She bent closer to the floor, pressing her ear to the wooden boards. For a moment there was silence. Then came a sound so soft it could have been imagined, a woman's whisper, muffled by the timber but close enough to make her heart lurch. Harriet. The typewriter rattled suddenly, a single key striking of its own accord. The letter A imprinted dark on the paper. Then another. Then another, until her name was spelled out, perfectly, across the page. The fire hissed out, leaving only the glow of her candle. Somewhere deep in the house, a door creaked open. The next morning brought a thin veil of sunlight, pale and uncertain, slipping through the curtains like a guest unsure of its welcome. Harriet felt as though she had barely slept. Her thoughts were fogged, heavy with fragments of sounds she could not explain. The page with her name still lay in the typewriter, its letters stark and accusing. Determined to quiet her mind, she explored the manor after breakfast. The house creaked with every step, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of lavender long faded. She passed through rooms half forgotten, the music room with its cracked piano, a library filled with books swollen from damp, and finally, a narrow staircase leading upward to a small door. The attic. It resisted her first push, as though reluctant to be opened, then gave way with a sharp sigh of hinges. Dust drifted like smoke in the dim light filtering through a circular window. Boxes lined the walls, their contents long abandoned. But at the center stood a writing desk, untouched by time, a quill still resting in an ink bottle dried to black crust. There, beneath a folded lace shawl, Harriet found a leather-bound journal. The initials AW were pressed faintly into its cover. Her pulse quickened. Lady Agatha Wren Lee. She opened the book carefully. The pages were brittle, filled with fine cursive writing, entries of loneliness, loss, and something darker that seemed to grow between the lines. One passage caught her breath. He lies to me even in death. The ground beneath the veil hides what no coffin holds. When the clock tolls 12, his voice will answer mine, and I shall be freed. Harriet read the words twice. Freed from what? From grief, or something far more binding. The floor beneath her gave a sudden groan. She looked up sharply. The air seemed to shift. Then, from the corner of the attic, came a faint ticking. Not like a clock, but softer, irregular, as if coming from inside the walls. She followed the sound to the far side of the room, where a section of timber paneling looked newer than the rest. Kneeling, she brushed her hand over it, and froze. Carved faintly into the wood were the same 3 words she had found on her paper downstairs. She remembers me. A cold shiver crept down her spine. Then, from behind the panel, something tapped back. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. Harriet stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a box. The journal slipped from her hands and fell open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if stirred by a hidden breath. One final line stared up at her, scrawled in a hand far less graceful than the rest. Do not wake him. That night, the rain fell in long, unbroken sheets, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Harriet sat by the fireplace, the journal open beside her, its last words circling her thoughts like vultures. Do not wake him. She told herself ghosts were nonsense. That grief could linger in a place, yes, but not as a whispering voice, not as the echo of footsteps beneath the floor. Yet every shadow in the room seemed to stretch closer, as though listening. When the clock in the hallway struck midnight, a sound carried from above, the slow scrape of wood against wood. The attic. Harriet grabbed her lantern and climbed the narrow stairs, her breath quick and shallow. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of wet timber. The attic door hung slightly open now, swinging gently as though someone had passed through. Inside, the journal still lay where she had left it, but the panel she had touched earlier was ajar. A narrow slit revealed darkness beyond. Her lantern's flame trembled. Gathering her courage, she pulled the panel wide. Behind it was a hollow space, barely large enough for a person to crouch in. A small chest sat within, its brass clasps tarnished with age. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were bones. Not many, only a few long and fragile, wrapped in rotting fabric, alongside a man's signet ring engraved with the letter W. Beneath them lay a yellowed scrap of parchment. The ink had faded, but one line was still legible. "Forgive me, Agatha." Harriet stumbled back, heart hammering. The story Mrs. Clary had whispered was true. Lady Agatha's husband had not died far away. He had been here, buried not in a grave, but behind her walls. The lantern light flickered wildly. A draft swept through the attic, and the journal's pages turned on their own, fluttering to the very end where new words appeared, fresh ink, still glistening. "He wakes when the veil weeps." A sudden creak below made her freeze. The sound of the front door yawning open. Rain hissed on the threshold. "Is someone there?" Harriet called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Only the hollow rhythm of dripping water. She descended slowly, lantern raised, its glow throwing long shadows down the staircase. The corridor stretched into darkness, and at its far end, the front door stood wide open. Beyond it, the vale lay drowned in fog. Yet through the mist, she could see footprints, bare, trailing wet mud from the doorway to the garden. They stopped beneath the window of the drawing room. And there, half sunk in the rain-soaked soil, was the shape of a grave. Freshly turned. The night air hung heavy with the scent of dust and age. Marianne stood at the bottom of the attic staircase, holding a lantern that trembled slightly in her grasp. The creak of the old manor around her seemed to echo her heartbeat, slow, uncertain, but unrelenting. When she finally gathered the courage to climb, each step groaned as if protesting her intrusion. The attic door stood half open, swaying gently despite the still air. She pushed it wider, revealing a vast, shadowed space cluttered with relics of the past, trunks, paintings, broken furniture, and a great number of clocks, all frozen at different times. But what drew her attention most was the sound. A faint ticking, impossibly steady, coming from the far end beneath a dusty sheet. She approached, lifting the cover to reveal an ornate wooden chest, its surface carved with the same swirling patterns she had seen on her father's old pocket watch. When she knelt to inspect it, a soft whisper filled the room. Her name. Marianne. The voice was neither fully male nor female, but something between, a whisper drawn from the depths of time. She froze, her breath catching as the ticking grew louder, synchronizing with the pulse in her veins. With trembling fingers, she lifted the latch of the chest. Inside, she found rows of hourglasses, each labeled with a name written in fine ink. Her eyes darted along the lines until one made her blood run cold. Marianne Whitlock. The sand in her hourglass was almost gone. Suddenly, a gust of wind burst through the window, scattering dust and papers into the air. The whisper grew frantic, echoing around her. "The clockmaker is awake. Do not let him finish the 12th turn." Her lantern flickered violently, and in that flicker she saw it, a tall, thin figure at the far corner of the attic, its face hidden beneath a clockmaker's mask of brass and glass, the hands of a timepiece spinning where its eyes should have been. Marianne stumbled back, heart pounding, as the figure raised its head towards her. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice a blend of gears and breath. And then, the clocks began to tick again, all at once. The manor was no longer silent. Every clock in the attic now chimed together, their sounds overlapping into a discordant symphony that rattled through the beams above Marianne's head. The masked figure stood motionless amid the chaos, its ticking breath keeping time with the din. Marianne's lantern dimmed and went out completely, leaving her in the glow of hundreds of clock faces, their hands spinning at impossible speed. She stumbled backwards, clutching the edge of a trunk as the floorboards trembled beneath her feet. "You were not meant to find this," the voice rasped through the brass mask. "Your blood was supposed to end the cycle, not restart it." "What are you talking about?" Marianne shouted over the noise, her voice breaking. "The Whitlock line has always been bound to time," it said. "Your grandfather crafted the first clocks that captured the breath of the living. Each hourglass below keeps a life in balance. But when one of your blood opens the chest..." A loud crack split the air. The chest at her feet trembled violently. The hourglass-marked Marianne Whitlock lifted itself upright, sand swirling upward instead of falling. The figure took a step closer. Its movements were unnaturally smooth, almost gliding. "The 12th turn has begun," it whispered. "When the last grain rises, time will reset, and all that has passed will vanish." Marianne looked around frantically, her eyes catching the faint outline of a broken clock face mounted on the far wall. The center bore an engraving she hadn't noticed before, a symbol that matched the pendant she had worn since childhood. Her mother had told her it was a keepsake. Now, it glowed faintly against her chest. Without understanding why, she reached for the clock face and pressed her pendant into the symbol. The clocks faltered. For a heartbeat, silence filled the attic. Then, every timepiece in the room let out a single, unified chime, one long, resonant toll that seemed to pierce the air itself. The masked figure froze, its gears whining. "You cannot stop the turn," it hissed. "You can only take his place." The sand in her hourglass was now rising faster, almost full. Marianne felt a deep cold spread from her hands to her chest, the weight of unseen mechanisms clicking into motion beneath her skin. She gasped, feeling time itself slow around her. Dust floated like snowflakes, suspended mid-air. The figure removed its mask, revealing not a face, but a hollow space filled with cogs, pendulums, and faint blue light. "Welcome, Keeper," it murmured, as its form began to dissolve into mist. "The 12th turn is yours now." Marianne fell to her knees as the final grain of sand lifted. The room brightened, then folded inward as though the air itself was being rewound. And when the light faded, the attic was empty, save for one new clock on the wall, still ticking. Inside its glass face, the reflection of a woman's eyes watched eternally, waiting for the next midnight. A storm rolled over Whitcombe Moor as midnight neared once more. Lightning flashed against the tall windows of the old manor, illuminating the faint silhouette of Marianne, now standing before the grand clock in the hall. Her skin was pale, her eyes darker than before, reflecting the slow, unending rhythm of time itself. Since that night in the attic, she had not slept. The clocks spoke to her in whispers, each one begging to be wound, each voice blending into a chorus of ticking memories. She now knew their names, their fates, and their hours. Every tick was a heartbeat she could feel, and every tack, an ending. The great clock before her showed 5 minutes to 12. Behind its glass, the faint image of the brass-masked figure lingered like a shadow. "You carry the weight well," it murmured from beyond the pendulum's swing. But the final hour must still be claimed. Marianne's hands trembled as she held her grandfather's key. "You said the 12th turn would end everything. Why am I still here?" "Because the keeper does not end with time," the voice replied. "She becomes its vessel. To free yourself, another must take your place." Thunder roared outside, shaking the house to its foundation. Marianne's thoughts raced to the village, faces she had seen only through the glass of their clocks. The baker whose laughter filled the square. The old librarian who read until dawn. The children whose hours flickered faintly each night. If she stopped the clocks, they would all perish. But if she continued, she would never be free. The hands of the great clock crept closer to 12. She felt the ticking pulse beneath her skin grow stronger, synchronizing with the rhythm of the house. Suddenly, the front door burst open. A rush of cold air flooded the hall, and through it stepped a young man holding a broken pocket watch, the same one her grandfather once wore. His eyes met hers, wide with recognition. "Marianne," he shouted. "You have to stop it. That clock, it's feeding on your life. You're becoming what he was." She stepped back, clutching her chest. The ticking in her body quickened. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I'm Thomas Whitlock," he said breathlessly. "Your brother." For a moment, silence swallowed the storm. Marianne stared, disbelief shattering her resolve. The last Whitlock, alive. The great clock began to chime. Once. Twice. The sound vibrated through the air like the world itself was cracking open. Thomas lunged forward. "If you let it reach 12, there will be no time left for anyone." Marianne raised the key, her pulse racing. "And if I stop it?" "Then you stop yourself," he cried. "But the rest of us live." The 11th chime rang. Dust fell from the ceiling. The floor trembled. Marianne's grip on the key faltered. And as the 12th chime began to toll, she turned the key one final time. The sound shattered through the manor like glass breaking underwater. The clocks stopped. The storm outside fell silent. When Thomas opened his eyes, the grand clock stood still, its hands frozen at midnight. Marianne was gone. But as he stepped closer, he saw her reflection in the glass. Her lips moved faintly, whispering words he could barely hear. "Keep time, well." And then her image faded, leaving behind the faintest echo of ticking, steady, eternal, waiting for the next turn.